lab lecture in. I'm going to do short lectures from now on. If you want the full burrito, you can go to the Moodle and look at the pre-labs that are there, if that's useful for you. All right. So I'm just going down through that lab outline if you have it there. If you're just logging into the Moodle, it's in one of the top few tabs up there, like class resources or whatever. Some terminology. Anatomical position. Anatomical position in yoga is what we call mountain pose. It is feet together, standing erect, looking forward, hands at the sides, palms facing forward. That's anatomical position. The term supine means lying down, face up. The way to remember that is, maybe this will help you, maybe it won't. A suppliant or a supplicant is a person who is begging for alms. Their hands are cupped upright, saying, please be merciful, compassionate, whatever, generous. Hands cupped facing upwards. That is supine, laying down, facing upwards. They have the same root etymology. Prone is lying face down. Such as the word pronate. To pronate your hands means to take them and make them facing down. Turn them downward, so prone. The concept of an anatomical landmark, it is the reference to a palpable or touchable structure. So an anatomical landmark may be, for example, your external occipital protuberance, your imion. That's an anatomical landmark, a little bump on the back of your head. Anatomical regions are the various regions in the body. We'll go through the various anatomical regions in a bit. There's also the abdominal pelvic quadrants and regions that are part of that. And then we're going to discuss anatomical directions. So the body, to be able to talk about the body, you don't just say, oh, it's over this or under that or next to this or that, the other thing. Because depending upon your point of reference, those terms can mean something different. So I'm going to establish a coordinate system for the body and the language needed to talk about it. All right, first, anatomical terminology. So the first is the vertical dimension. That is superior and inferior. Superior is from your apple core, the very tip of your head, is the most superior point, and everything below that is inferior. The plantar surface of your feet, the very underside of your feet, is the most inferior point on your body. Everything else is superior to that. We live in 3 spatial dimensions, so that is describing the vertical, the up and down spatial dimensions, superior and inferior. In the torso, just in the axial body, remember I said the axial is things along the central axis, and appendicular is your appendages, your arms and legs. In the axial body, there are the terms cranial and caudal that you will sometimes come across. They refer to the same direction as superior and inferior, but they refer to the cranium is the head, and the caudus is your tail. All right, so cranial is superior, caudal is inferior in the axial skeleton. All right, in the appendicular body, the analogy of that, the analog of that, is proximal and distal. All right, so if in the appendages, the arms and the legs, something is proximal if it is closer to the midline, closer to your torso. It's proximal. Further away, a greater distance is distal. All right. So the hand is proximal or distal to the body compared to the elbow. Distal. All right. Yeah. All right. The second spatial dimension is we'll do front to back. Front to back. Right. So anything on the front side of the body is anterior. Your nose is the most anterior point in your body, whatever, this front side. Everything going that way is posterior to that, all right? And then the back is totally posterior. In the axial body, you will also find terms ventral and dorsal. Ventral meaning the side of the lungs, dorsum meaning back, all right? So just like cranial and caudal is superior and inferior in the torso, ventral and dorsal is anterior and posterior. All right, the last one, the last spatial dimension is left to right, side to side. But it's not really left to right in the human body because we are biradially symmetric, bilaterally symmetric down the middle, meaning the left half of our body is more or less a mirror image of the right half of our body. So instead of left to right, our reference point is our midline, the midline. So the very midline is the most medial point in the body. Everything either to the left or the right of that is lateral. All right. So for example, my eye is medial to my ear. My shoulder is lateral to my sternocleidomastoid. Okay, pretty simple. But this notion of establishing three spatial dimensions in the body is important also in identifying a bone in anatomy lab. All right. So, for example, we give you a bone, and this is not a human bone, but to know whether this bone comes from the left or the right side of the body, you have to figure out what is the proximal and distal end of the bone. That's one dimension. You have to figure out which is the anterior and posterior end of the bone. That will give you the second. And then which is the medial and lateral dimension of the bone. And that will give you, if you establish those three things, that will tell you which side of the body the bone is from. Okay? So that is an important thing when trying to identify a bone and what side of the body it's on. Whew. Okay, we just went through all those. Those are in a table here. A couple, the reason this table is here, there's just a couple on the bottom that were not in the on that diagram. Superficial and deep. Superficial is your skin is the most superficial. The integument is the most superficial structure in your body, and then anything inside below that is deep. All right. So the dermis is deep to the epidermis. The dermis is superficial to the hypodermis, for example. Okay. All right, regions of the human body. Here it is tabulated. I'm going to go through the diagram rather than the table, but you can go back and look at that table if you wish. So these are the medical terms for regions of the body. When you get up there and you're going to give your talk in front of the medical students, you're not going to say my shin bone's connected to my knee bone, that kind of thing. You're going to talk about the manus, the cephalon, the cervical region, what have you. You're going to use the medical terms for the places in the body. So there's the cephalon, so there's also two different words that we're going to use here. There's the nominative form, which is the noun, and there's the adjectival form or the adjective. So cephalon or cephalic, right? Something cephalon is the noun, that is the head, or cephalic means something relating to the head, right? So cephalon or cephalic, there is that's broken down into two regions. There is the cranium, which is the brain case, and then there is the face, the facial region, which is the bones right here, not surrounding the brain, and then there's the cranial region that is surrounding the brain. Cranium or cranial, adjective, face, facies, or facial region. Some of these, like, you'll just hear face, not facies. That's the nasal region, the oculus or eye, the oris region, or otic is the adjective. Bucca means cheek or buckle. You hear the term buckle quite a bit. Cervicis is the name for the neck, or cervical is the adjective. A lot of these you'll hear the adjective much more than the noun in common usage. So cervical vertebra, for example. Oris is the mouth or oral. Thoracis or thorax is your chest. The adjective is thoracic. Mentis is your chin or mental. There are the mental foramen that are right here. Axilla is your armpit. Axillary is the adjective. Brachium or brachial is the arm. And the forearm is, I'm sorry, that's not on this list. The front of the elbow, this little area right here has its own name. This is the antecubitus or antecubital region. All right. Abdomen is your, I think everybody knows that word, abdominal. Umbilicus or umbilicus is your belly button or navel, or the umbilical. That's all those. Dorsum is the back or dorsal. All right. So the antebrachium is your forearm, antebrachial. Carpus is the wrist or carpal. Palm, of course, or palmar surface of your hand. Pelvis or pelvic, I think those are common. Manus, manual is the entire hand. Inguine. The inguine is this region right here that runs from the ischial tuberosity to the pubic tuberosity. That's the inguinal region. Pubis or pubic region. Let me think what else. The femur or femoral region. The patellar region. The crus is your foreleg. That's one that you're maybe not familiar with. Crus or crural region is the foreleg. Tarsus or tarsal is the ankle. The pes or pedal region is the foot. And then, let's see, yep. So lumbus is your lower back and lumbar region. The gluteus or gluteal region is your butt, the buttock. This diamond-shaped area behind the knee is the popliteal region, or the popliteus, the popliteal fossa. The calf is the sura, or the sural region. Heel is your calcaneus. And planta, or plantar region, is the bottom of your foot. All right, the abdominal pelvic terms. So in A, we have the quadrants, the abdominal pelvic quadrants. And I marked those off. This guy. Here you get this acupuncture model in green, and this one here as well. So the green on these guys is identifying the four abdominal pelvic quadrants. This is basically a crosshair centered on the umbilicus. And so there's the right and left upper quadrants and the right and left lower quadrants. Very rough designation of where in the stomach, in the abdomen you're talking about. A little bit finer grain resolution are the abdominal pelvic regions. So quadrant 4 cut into 4 regions. Regions, there's actually 9 of them, 3 top, middle, and bottom. They have their own names. So there's the right and left hypochondriac regions. What is a hypochondriac? Anyone heard that term before? Probably many of you. What does it mean to be a hypochondriac? Nobody's heard that term before? What do you think?
It's like someone who perceives that they have lots of illnesses or maybe they don't.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a psychologic condition. However, why do we call this the hypochondriac region? Anybody like to venture a guess? You're guessing. I don't expect you to know. Just take a wild shot in the dark. Don't be timid. Life is too short and exciting to be timid. Only by being wrong do we learn. Break it down.
Maybe like nothing really happens there, like because it's, I don't know, if you're a hypochondriac, you don't actually have anything.
And that's related to the story of what a hypochondriac is. You're on the right track. Break the word down. What's hypo mean? Less, below. Yeah. And then, does anybody know what the word chondriac might mean? Chondrosis? Chondral? Does anyone have a guess? No? Never heard that term? It means cartilage. So, it's below the cartilage. In fact, it's below the cartilage of the ribs. So if you look on this guy here, you'll see there's a bunch of cartilage along the lower margin of the ribs. Hypochondriac. Hypochondriacs, the psychologic condition, is due to the fact that people would go into the doctor and say, "Oh, doctor, oh, right here, it hurts, right around here somewhere. I don't know, it's right over here. This is where." Really, these were people who were neurotic and probably having gallbladder issues. They're having gallbladder issues because they were so anxious. Lots of spleen. I don't know. That's the origin of that word. Hypochondriac. Epigastric. Break that word down. Has anyone here ever taken a Latin or a Greek class? What does epi mean? Yeah, near. Beside. Yeah, beside. So, beside and then gastric. What do you think that means? Stomach. It's the area adjacent to the stomach. So we have the right and left hypochondriac regions, the epigastric region. Then I said the lower back or loin is called the lumbus or lumbar region, right? So we have the right and left lumbar regions. The umbilical region is pretty self-explanatory, centered on the umbilicus. And then we have the right and left inguinal regions covering the inguine. And then the hypogastric, or often called pubic region, in between the two of those. Down here, we can see why this even matters. Because if you know where the underlying structures are in relationship to these surface designations, you can pretty quickly tune in to what's going on. Okay? This line that defines the hypochondriac region extends between the two inferior margins of the chondral portions of your ribs. This plane here extends between the two ischial tuberosities, the points of your hips. Okay? And then if you drop lines straight down from the areola of your breasts, then you can get the two vertical planes. All right? By having those anatomical landmarks and knowing the underlying anatomy, very quickly, just from a surface examination of honing in on the pain or whatever, you can surmise what pathology might be in play. All right. The planes. A plane is a three-dimensional axis, whereas a section is a slice parallel to a plane. All right, here are the anatomical planes. There's the frontal, the sagittal, and the transverse plane. The frontal plane is any plane that is separating anterior from posterior. Okay? So it runs in the medial to lateral and superior to inferior dimensions. All right? It separates you from from anterior to posterior, a frontal plane. There's the sagittal plane. The sagittal plane separates the left from the right, or the medial from the lateral if it's not running down the middle. So this is running in the superior to inferior plane and the anterior to posterior dimension. Okay, sagittal plane. Can anyone guess why it's called the sagittal plane? I only tell these stories to help you remember things. So if you're having a hard time, this is a side, like in the future, when you have many more words to memorize down the road than you will in this class, it helps to know the word origin, like why they call the word that word. What is the ancient Greek or Latin roots mean? It will help you understand, or at least remember, why those words are used. So, sagittal plane. What does that word remind you of? Is there any other word you've heard that sounds like that? Sage. Okay. Yeah, I have to think about that. That must be related. That wasn't the word I was thinking of, but it must be related. Yeah. Yeah, probably adjacent, like older. What's another word that actually? So if I just gave you that Sagitt, and I told you to guess what the rest of the word was going to be.
Sagittarius.
Sagittarius. What is Sagittarius? It's an anatomical, or it's an astrologic sign, right? And what does the Sagittarius look like? You guys remember what the Sagittarius looks like? It is a half horse, half man, right? It's a half horse, half man. Sagittarius, horse. Half man, half horse. Sagittarius means man. And so the sagittal plane is dividing the man in half. It runs straight through the center of your manhood, down the median line. Okay? Sagittal plane. Transverse plane separates a person from superior to inferior, running through the posterior to anterior and medial to lateral dimensions. Okay? All right, so these planes are important because when we, diagnostically, when we are trying to visualize the body, radiology is huge, right? So we have X-ray, MRI, CAT scan, PET scan, the list goes on. And this is how we identify what we're looking at. We need to know what kind of section we're looking at to be able to make sense of those planes. So for example, here is this MRI. What plane was that in? Would you guess? Just looking at that. Frontal. Just shout it out. Okay. We'll do this one here. So that's a nose. These are some ears, sort of like this. What plane would that be? Transverse. And then this pretty poor image, that's a CAT scan, no, PET scan, sorry, showing some cancer in this individual. That's a head, that's his tail. What plane would that be? Sagittal plane, yeah. All right. Organs. You can tear these pieces apart and find all the organs in here. The ones that you're going to be responsible for are the brain. I think we all know where that is in the cranium. The pharynx and larynx. The pharynx is the back of the throat. The larynx is So the pharynx is all of the space that is, if you look, have somebody open their mouth, you're going to see that rim in the back of their mouth, where it's like kind of dark behind it, and you can see the uvula as the little punching bag thing from the Looney Tunes. That is at the top of your throat. Behind that is the pharynx, that dark area way back in there. That's the pharynx. The pharynx has 3 regions, which we'll talk about more in that lecture. The larynx is everything that is associated with your windpipe and your vocal cords. All right, so it deviates from the pharynx is this space at the back of the nasal cavity and the throat that, as you descend, splits into the larynx, which goes down to the lungs, and the esophagus, which goes down to the stomach. All right. Trachea is your windpipe. Thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is an endocrine gland that hides behind the thyroid cartilage that is right there. You can feel it. It's your Adam's apple is your thyroid cartilage. The thyroid gland's deep to that. Thymus is a gland that lives on the top of the heart, and we do have a model that shows the thymus here, maybe in this guy. That is reduced in adults. It's mostly present in children. Lungs, I think we know where that is. The heart, the esophagus is the tube that leads down to the stomach. Passes through the esophageal hiatus. So if you look here, this is the esophagus. Here's the trachea. The esophagus. This is the thyroid gland right there, below the thyroid cartilage, not behind that. Here's the esophagus as it pierces the diaphragm through this esophageal hiatus. So that's actually the esophagus here. Would connect up with the stomach. If the stomach was in place, I don't know where the stomach of this guy is. Here it is. The stomach would be sitting here just like that. All right. Pancreas. Pancreas is on these models right there, it's deep to the stomach, and releases its contents into the luminal contents of the duodenum. This is the organ that makes insulin. The spleen. Spleen in these models, it's an organ. Oh, here it is. It's right attached. It's this purple organ. You can't see it in that model, but if you remove the stomach, you'll see it's kind of squished to the left side in the back of the abdominal, superior portion of the abdominal compartment. Small and large intestines. So all this stuff here is the small intestine. The large intestine, or colon, is this big structure here in gray that receives the contents of the small intestine to extract the water and then eventually eliminate the feces from the body as waste. Appendix. The appendix is, in this model, this little finger that's sticking out the back end of the large intestines, the vermiform appendix, the worm-like appendix right here. It's a vestigial digestive organ for when we had higher plant content in our diet than we do now. It's really only it has lymphatic properties. It is involved in the lymph system, but mostly doesn't serve much of a purpose. Liver is this big red organ here on the right side of the body. If we take the liver and flip it over, you'll find the gallbladder designated in green on the underside in this model. Often painted green in these models because it kind of looks green when you actually see one because of the biliverdin in the bile that is held there. The pancreas is on the slide twice. Suprarenal glands, or the adrenal glands. The kidneys are pinned what's called retroperitoneally to the back of the abdominal contents. Don't be afraid to tear that thing apart while we're talking about it. These things are older than me, probably. Kidneys are retroperitoneal, meaning they're behind what's called the peritoneum. We'll talk about that later. And above the kidneys are these two suprarenal glands, formerly called adrenal. But the word for them now is suprarenal. We used to call it adrenaline. We do not call it adrenaline anymore. It's called epinephrine now. Okay? Epinephrine comes from the suprarenal glands when adrenaline used to come from the adrenal glands. No longer. Kidneys, and then the urinary bladder. Urinary bladder is... Send from the kidneys, go down through this ligamentous sheet into the back. That's the muscle wall, muscle ball that's at the base of the bowl of the pelvis, the urinary bladder. Okay. So next, the concept of the body cavities. There's the ventral body cavity. So this is this big space inside the wall of your body. It's broken up into two regions, which then are then further subdivided. Those two regions are separated by what's called the abdominal diaphragm. Diaphragm right here. This is a muscular sheet that runs from the back side of the body wall up and over beneath the lungs in the rib cage and separates the thoracic cavity of the thorax from the abdominal cavity, the abdominal pelvic cavity, pardon me, of the abdominal pelvic region. So first, the thoracic cavity is subdivided into all these regions. There's the right and left pleural cavities. These are the areas where the lungs are kept. Has anyone heard of the term pleurisy? We'll get to that word in a minute. And then between them is the mediastinum. Media in between sternum, in the middle of the body. Mediastinum. And the mediastinum has the heart, the trachea, the esophagus, all the major vessels running through there, as well as the pericardial cavity. This is a special cavity that just surrounds the heart. We give it its own name because it's pretty important. Then the abdominal pelvic cavity is separated into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. The pelvic cavity is basically the area below that pelvic margin, below the pelvic margin. All right. So the next concept that we need here is the concept of serous membrane. Inside these cavities are our viscera, all of the organs that are going to do what they do for us. The heart is constantly moving, constantly beating. The lungs are constantly filling and contracting. Food is constantly moving through our intestines, our stomach, through our GI tract. There's a lot of motion happening inside the body. We are moving as well. We can move our trunk, our torso, further mixing things up inside. It's important that all of the viscera, all of the organs, all of the structures inside these cavities are able to slide over one another smoothly. It wouldn't feel real nice if it was kind of like dry surface scraping against dry surface, right? It sounds pretty uncomfortable. The way this happens is through the action of the serous membranes. There are three. There are three serous membranes. They are the pericardium, the peritoneum, and the pleural. The pleural, P-L-E-U-R-A-L, the pleural serous membrane. And so what are they? They're basically membranes that cover an organ and then form a pouch around it. So there are two layers to any serous membrane. There is the visceral serous membrane and the parietal serous membrane. Let's talk about the pericardium. Peri means beside, cardium, heart. So the serous membrane covering the heart is the pericardium. There's two layers to the pericardium. The visceral pericardium. The visceral pericardium is that serous layer that's right adhered to the heart. It's attached to the heart. And then there is the parietal pericardium that is not. And inside, between those two, in this bag, is this pericardial cavity. So imagine a balloon that is kind of not fully filled up. And you can stick your hand into that balloon. The rubber that is in the balloon is contacting your hand is if your hand was a heart, would be the visceral pericardium. And then the rest of the balloon would be the parietal pericardium. The inside of that balloon would be the pericardial cavity. All right? And there's a serous exudate that is in here, basically a slippery, slimy exudate that's in here that enables this surface to slide over that surface with very low friction. Okay? Has anyone heard the word parietal before? Yeah.
Parietal means on top.
Sort of.
In the brain, it's parietal.
Parietal lobe. Good thinking. The parietal lobe is in the brain, but I'll tell you, and it is towards the top, but I'll tell you why it's called parietal. Anyone else want to take a stab at that word? So, for example, I went to graduate school and did some medical school work at Notre Dame. A bunch of Catholics there. And Catholics do not allow men in women's dorms after 9 p.m. They call that parietals on campus. If you are caught in the wrong dorm after parietals, you're in trouble. And what does the word mean? It means literally wall. It means wall, meaning like the wall over which naughty students could not climb, should not climb. It's the wall, protecting their virtue. So parietal means wall. The parietal pericardium is the pericardium that lines the wall of the compartment that the organ is in. The visceral pericardium is the pericardial membrane that's on the viscera, on the actual organ. Make sense? Did I do that right? Yeah. Oops. Yeah. Okay. So we've covered pericardial cavity. There's also pleural cavity. These are the serous membranes that cover the lungs. Okay? The heart, as it pushes into the pericardium, that wrist, the part that's pushing in, is essentially the great vessels, the vessels that are sticking out the top. For the lung, it's the bronchi and the various blood vessels that are going into the lung. All right? The pleura surrounds the lung. There is a visceral pleura, which lays right on the lung, and a parietal pleura that lies on the outside body wall there. pleurisy is, if you like to read Charles Dickens stories, or maybe you had a really old school grandma who had these like horrible lung inflammations because of drafty houses or whatever. This is just an inflammation of the pleura, the serous lining around the lung, so it made it like painful to breathe for these people. And then the third serous membrane, we have the pericardium, the pleura. The third is the peritoneum. This is the serous membrane that covers your abdominal viscera, the intestines, the stomach, all the moving bits down there. All right. So there is a sheet of visceral peritoneum. Peritoneum is stuff inside your abdomen that covers all of the abdominal contents, right? The intestines and whatnot. And then the parietal peritoneum branches off along the back side of the posterior aspect of the abdominal compartment and attaches to the wall and then coats the entire inside of the abdominal cavity. That is the parietal peritoneum. All of the organs in your abdominal cavity are covered in visceral peritoneum, except the kidneys. The kidneys are in what is called the retroperitoneal space. They are outside of the peritoneum. Your kidneys don't really move that much. Don't need to be covered in that much peritoneum. They are covered in a single thin sheet just on the superficial surface of the kidney and pinned to the back wall of the abdominal cavity by a layer of parietal peritoneum. All right? Just a layer of parietal peritoneum covering one side of the kidney, pinning them into what's called the retroperitoneal space. Has anybody ever had a relative, a grandpa, a great-grandpa, or something like that, that was in kidney failure? Anyone know anybody in kidney failure? They go on dialysis, right, where the kidneys don't work anymore. We need to get the stuff out of the blood, the toxins out of the blood, so they pump the blood out and put it in. If you are in acute kidney failure, another thing that is sometimes done is what's called a peritoneal lavage. Not fun. Not fun for these people, but it can save their life if it needs to be. So what they'll do is they'll puncture the abdominal wall and go into the abdominal space, not into the contents of the abdomen, right? You don't want to go through the abdominal wall where all the feces is. That's bad. But in the abdominal compartment inside the peritoneal cavity, they puncture their way in there, and then they pump it full of a hypotonic solution that then causes waste materials and electrolytes and all kinds of stuff to diffuse across the peritoneal membrane into this water, and then they suck it out. Lavage just means wash. It's a peritoneal wash. It's something that they can do to people who are in kidney failure instead of dialysis. It's not fun for those people, and it's not as effective as dialysis, but it does work in a pinch. All right. Interpreting tissue sections. Yeah. So everything I've talked about so far, most of that can be identified on these big models here. I've got some other models. You're going to have to take your time and explore them to find all that. The next is histology. There's a lot of slides. I actually only have about half of the slides that I'm going to talk about today out on the deck. I'll put the rest out later. I wasn't able to get my hands on quite all the slides today, but they're coming. So we're going to talk about interpreting those slides. When on your own, when you have the time to look at this stuff, you'll find microscopes underneath the deck under here. The proper way to carry a microscope is by the neck and putting a hand beneath the base. Don't pick it up by this stuff. All right. If you've never used a microscope, I'm happy to show you how to use it. There is a correct way to use a microscope so that it always comes into focus and you do not smash the slide that you're looking at. Basically, always start by lowering the stage all the way before you put a slide in or out, and then bring it up, just up to the point of the objective with your eyes away from the hole, and then begin to lower it down with your eyes looking through it. That way you will not crack the slides. Please don't crack the slides. Some of those slides are older than your grandparents, probably. Some of them are old. Older slides tend to be better, though. They don't make them like they used to. All right. So what is a histologic section? It's basically just a thin tissue slice that's stuck on a slide and fixed with some sort of dye that gives you a color contrast. All right. So it reduces the three-dimensional structure of an anatomical feature to a two-dimensional slice. We're just taking a cross-section of it. So it's good to be able to know what you're looking at. So for example, if I were going to take slices of an egg, here's an egg. We know what eggs look like, right? We have a sense that's a big ovoid shape with another spherical shape in the center. But if we take slices of it, we can infer what the overall structure is by looking at these different slices through it. The same with a tube. Here is some kind of U-shaped tube, and you take a slice, maybe you would see in the slice just two separate circles, or some kind of weird shape like that, right? Or a thin slice here. These are all sections of the same structure. By knowing what you're, knowing how to interpret that in a three-dimensional spatial way will give you an insight into what you're actually looking at. And the same, this like crazy squiggly tube, if we took a thin slice through it, it's going to give us, we're not going to be able to slice right down the spirals of that tube. We're going to take a straight slice. It's going to give us that odd pattern there as we cut through it. Okay? It's probably obvious to everybody, but I'm just going over it. Anyways, also, like for example here, a blood vessel, you take a slice through it, and you're going to see parallel lines this way, longitudinally. A cross section is going to give you a circle, and an oblique section will give you an oval. Right? Different ways of visualizing the same three-dimensional structure, just how you slice it. A smear is just taking a tissue sample and then smearing it across the slide. A spread is taking a tissue sample and drawing them out. So some of the slides that we're going to see are smears or spreads. All right, on to some actual anatomy. So I'm going to talk about this in the lecture tomorrow as well. But I'm going to give you some anatomy now. Epithelial cells. These are the cells that are covering everything around us, everything in us, the surface. They can be classified morphologically. The first classification is simple. These are layers of epithelia that are simple because there's only one cell. The cell layer is only one cell thick. We have squamous, simple squamous epithelia. These are epithelial cells that have been squashed. Squamous just means squashed. Simple squamous epithelia. We have cuboidal, simple cuboidal epithelia. These are, as the name implies, cubes, but simple because the layer is only one cell thick. And then columnar, columns, like cuboidal, but long cells. Simple because it's only one cell layer thick. All right? So simple is contrasted to stratified. Stratified means strata means layer, so there are many layers. So we have stratified squamous epithelium. These are layers of squashed cells. There is cuboidal, stratified cuboidal. So it's basically stacks of blocks, these cubic blocks. And then there is stratified columnar, long, thin cells that are stacked in many layers. All right, I'm going to go through these one at a time in a little more depth. So there will be examples of all of these in slides out, and I suggest you take the time at some point when you have when I'm not talking to look at them. All right, so simple squamous epithelium. We find these in the ventral body cavities and the endothelial lining the heart and blood vessels. So a simple squamous epithelium would be like the inside of your arteries. Portions of the kidneys, the thin section of the nephron. We find it in all sorts of places. The thing about simple squamous epithelium, it produces a layer of epithelium that has variable permeability. It's a layer that we will actually let something through. We're going to let something through. And maybe we want to let certain things through and not others. So it's this thin single layer of cells that we're using to control permeability. It also helps to reduce the friction. All right. Here's some simple cuboidal. We find these primarily in the liver. So the liver is made up of like an insanely complex meshwork of tubes. The tubes are built of bricks, these simple cuboidal epithelial cells, basically just big cubes that are blocks that make up the tubes of the kidney. Simple columnar. This is found predominantly throughout the GI tract, and these protect, secrete, and absorb. Protect, secrete, and absorb. All epithelia, and we're going to talk about this in the lecture tomorrow, but they have some kind of secretory function. They're going to be producing something and releasing it on the surface of the cell. All right, some kind of fluid, maybe hormones, whatever. There's all kinds of stuff. Also absorption. They're gatekeepers. They're tissue boundary gatekeepers. All right, on to the stratified squamous epithelium. This is in portions of the GI tract that need a little more protection, such as the inside of the mouth, rectum, vagina, and it's thicker. It's going to give you protection from pathogens, chemicals, trauma of any sort, abrasion. All right. We're going to move on to the connective tissues. So we did epithelium, now is connective tissues. Epithelia and connective tissues are two of the four tissue types, which we're going to talk about in lecture tomorrow. These connective tissues break down along one of the categories is loose connective tissue. There's three types of this category. In adults, at least, these three types are areolar, adipose, and reticular. I'm going to look at those. Areolar connective tissue, you'll find slides of those out there. This areolar tissue is all over the body. All over the body. It is, if you were to look at that tissue, man, we need a new bulb in there. What properties would you guess this tissue has? Just looking at that stuff. Say you were to make a big macroscopic three-dimensional model of that stuff. What would that be good for? Yeah, it's pretty elastic stuff. It's strong in a two-dimensional plane. It's very strong in a two-dimensional plane. It's got elastic fibers. It's got collagen fibers. Pretty strong stuff. It takes its name from the areola of the breast. the dark brown circle that surrounds the nipple. That part of the breast is particularly stretchy tissue. It's particularly stretchy because babies are constantly sucking and pulling on that stuff, stretching it around. So it's highly concentrated in that part of the nipple, but everywhere in the body. It's all over the place. It goes throughout the dermis in the body. Very strong, stretchy, resilient material that comes back to its original shape. Adipose tissue. This is the second type of loose connective tissue. So, pretty simply, this is fat tissue. This is for the storage of fat, and as such, it is an energy reserve. It is also important for insulation and protection of structures by surrounding things with this protective layer of fat. Yeah. All right. I didn't go into reticular tissue. The second category of connective tissues are these dense connective tissues. Dense regular connective tissue here. So it's dense, meaning it's highly packed together. It's regular in that the fibers are all going in the same direction. Okay? This is a massive survey of this, right? I'm like very selective in the ones that I'm picking out. There is, of course, dense, irregular connective tissue, etc. I'm going to go in lecture through them much more explicitly, but I'm only covering the ones that I have slides of for you to look at. Okay. Cartilage is another type of connective tissue. There are a number of types of cartilage. This one is hyaline cartilage. This is the kind of cartilage that your nasal septum is made up of. Yeah, it's the stuff that is laid down and then ossifies to become bone. It connects. It's part of most of the joints in your body, hyaline cartilage. All right. So it is a little bit more flexible than, actually quite a bit more flexible than bone, but it's still a sort of stiff, if not rigid, support structure between bony surfaces. Elastic cartilage, much more flexible than the hyaline cartilage because it has many more of these lacunae, these holes in the cartilaginous matrix. We'll talk about that in the lecture tomorrow. But an excellent example of this is the ear, this ear thing, much more flexible than hyaline cartilage. Also in the epiglottis, that flap that closes down over the glottis when you swallow so you don't aspirate any of the things you're chewing on. And then the third type is fibrocartilage. This is one I talk about the most when I'm teaching yoga. Fibrocartilage is actually the stiffest and strongest of the these cartilages. They form the annular rings of the intervertebral discs. Very, very, very strong, dense cartilage. It's also part of the pubic symphysis, which your pelvis is actually broken into two sides, and down the middle is this fibrocartilaginous disc called the pubic symphysis. So while she's here, this is Ari Thomas. She took the class last year, and she is the TA for the class this year. This is a great time to introduce the what's going on. So she is, for the last 3 or 4 years now, there has been an internship where one of the students that has taken this class gets the next year to come back and ideally tail a nurse practitioner, although she's doing a doctor this year. And you spend the day following them around, and then you come in here and you get to be my TA and get paid for that. So, yeah. At the end of the semester, she will give a talk to the class about her experience with her doctor for the semester. Anyways, Ari's a great student and did well in the class. And if you ever see her around when she's in here working, please feel free to solicit some help from her. She'll do what she can, I'm sure. Otherwise, yeah, that's that. I'm almost done. Yeah. So fibrocartilage, that's enough of that. This is bone. We saw a little bit of this in lecture today. So bone, we're going to talk about more tomorrow in lab. So I'm just going to point it out. It's one of the tissues that you're going to need to be responsible for. And then finally, dermis. Dermis. The skin. There are two types of skin. There's thick skin and thin skin. These are depictions of thick skin. Thick skin is exclusively found on the palms of your hands and the soles, the plantar surface of your feet. Everywhere else is thin skin. So let me see here. There are two skin models in the class here. They're right here. Skin itself is broken up into the epidermal layer. That's this layer of dead skin cells on the top. Then the papillary layer, which is denoted here in purple, called the papillary layer. Pardon me. Both of these together make the epidermis. This is the stratum corneum of the epidermis. This is the papillary layer of the epidermis, which also has sublevels that we're going to talk about in lecture tomorrow. But this stratum corneum is the dead cells. The papillary layer are the living cells in the epidermis. It's called the papillary layer because it's made up of all these little papilla, these papilla. Papilla is a Latin word that means tiny little hill. So it's made of tiny little hills that help for sensation and give the skin a little bit of tensile stretchability. You can stretch those little hills out. Below the epidermis is the dermal layer, and that's what we see here. All of this is dermis. This top layer of dermis is the papillary layer of the dermis, and then below that is the reticular layer of the dermis. Okay? We're again going to talk about those in more detail tomorrow. All right, so that's just showing that. So the papillary layer is just that part of the dermis that has these bumps on it, as is this part of the epidermis. Those are papillary layer of the epidermis, papillary layer of the dermis. Yeah, here's the skin model. So what can I see on one of these skin models? Here, I'll give this back to you. Well, there's the epidermis, which is this region up here. This is made of the stratum corneum, which is that top layer, and then the stratum germinativum, which is broken up into a number of other sections as well. But this is the germinative layer, the layer of the living, active, dividing cells of the epidermis. Below that is the papillary layer of the dermis. Here is a hair follicle. This entire structure is a hair follicle. This is a hair shaft down in the hair follicle. I say a sebaceous gland would be this is one example of a sebaceous gland putting oil onto or sebum onto the shaft of the hair. This is an erector pili muscle. These are erector pili muscles, muscles that are bringing your hair, the pilla of your hair erect. And then this would be dermis, this area. So this is all fat right here, and this would be hypodermis below that. So above the fat, all the way up to the dermal papillary layer, that is dermis. So papillary layer, and then reticular layer is right in here. It's going to have dense, irregular connective tissue, mostly. And then we have sweat glands, which are demonstrated right here. The sweat gland resides at that junction between the hypodermis and dermis, and then releases out onto the surface of the skin. As I said, the hypodermis down here. When we get into the sensory chapter, we'll talk about some of these sensory neurons that we see up here, like the Pacinian corpuscle or the Meissner's corpuscle. That's it. Great.